So good morning. Good morning to all. Many of you know me. My name is Lily Cox. I am the Director of Communications and Community Investments here at the St. Croix Foundation. And on behalf of our board and staff and our incredible Kids Count team, it is my real pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us for the release of the official 2023 Kids Count USVI data book, a call to action sounding the alarm on child well-being in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So for our call today, we have a very full agenda, as you can see. So I'm going to move quickly through introductions. I'll hand the mic over to Deanna James, our president, and she'll provide a few remarks about Kids Count, Annie Casey, and the work in the Virgin Islands. Dr. Anna Scabriel is with us. She's going to be talking briefly about our systems tool, revisiting that. And then we will have Dr. Saul Santiago, our principal investigator in data analysis, along with Lori Blake, who is our data researcher and designer, talking about key data indicators. Charmaine Hobson will be talking to us about strategy. She's our sector liaison, as well as Dr. Alethea Fraser-Rayner, who will be speaking about bright spots and the overall work of Kids Count under the Foundation stewardship. We will finally end with some Q&A. We hope to have about at least 15 to 20 minutes for that, perhaps more. And on that note, let me move forward with some formal introductions. As I mentioned, we have Dr. Saul Santiago. It's hard for me to see my Zoom screen. Saul is our data analyst and principal investigator. Miss Lori Blake is our data researcher and designer. Hi, Lori. I know you're out there. Dr. Alethea Fraser-Rayner is our outreach and engagement coordinator, working directly with our civic sector nonprofit organizations. Ms. Charmaine Hobson is our sector liaison, and she is connecting points and people across sector lines. Of course, many of you know our president, Deanna James. Hi, Deanna. I am Lily. Dr. Anna Scabriel, where are you? There you are. And Dr. Lucy Jackson, I don't see her with us, but she also works with us on policy analysis. So without further ado, I will hand the mic over to you, Deanna.
Thank you, Lily. Welcome to everyone. Good morning. It feels like I should be saying good night. We pulled an all-nighter last night to make sure that everything was perfect for today's release. It's a big day for us. On behalf of the board and the staff of the St. Croix Foundation, as well as our incredibly talented and dedicated Kids Count USVI team, we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for what I hope will be time well spent. I say this every year, but if people really knew the heavy lift that our Kids Count team does every single year, every day of the year, I think you all would be impressed. I know I am beyond impressed. I'm actually humbled and abundantly inspired by the way in which our team comes together every single year to pull this data book together for the community and to be a voice for our voiceless in our community. I have had the incredible privilege over the last 4 years that we've been leading Kids Count work to also connect with an incredible number of government partners, of data partners in our public sector who make this data book release possible. Seriously, I think we have some of the most amazing, talented folks in our public sector who are in many ways the unsung heroes of our government. And in this work that we're doing, I would be remiss to also not acknowledge my team at St. Croix Foundation, my operational team at the foundation, who allow Lily and I the time, the space, and the resources to do this important work. Now, While I hope everyone here today knows about Kids Count, I'll provide a little bit of background about why we're here. For 2 decades, Kids Count has been an invaluable resource for our community, providing stakeholders with a barometer on how children and families here in the Virgin Islands are faring. Kids Count has not only been an essential part of local policy development, government and nonprofit sector federal and philanthropic fundraising, but it has also been a fundamental part of St. Croix Foundation's own programmatic prioritization and planning. Launched by the NEKC Foundation in 1990, for 30 years, Kids Count has served as one of the most comprehensive data repositories for many, if not most, state and city governments across the nation. Almost 4 years ago, in February of 2020, just minutes before the world went into lockdown, NEKC tapped St. Croix Foundation to lead Kids Count for the territory. It has been an interesting journey for us in the 4 years since. Now about this year's data book. As you look at the cover, and Lily showed you the cover in I think the slide prior to this, and we're really excited about that because the cover is important to us. It helps us to frame the story. And this year, the cover image, which is entitled Sunset by local photographer David Berg, was actually just a really fuzzy idea in my mind. An idea that I shared with one of our wonderful partners at the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts, Jay Weiss. And Jay in turn transmuted my idea into a riveting and powerful message, which we hope will amplify the voice and conditions of our children. We also believe, even before you flip the first page of our virtual data book, that it illustrates the power of art and storytelling. Our team member, Alethea Fraser-Rayner, will share some powerful closing thoughts at the end of our presentation this morning about the meaning of it all. As we have done with all of our previous publications, we chose the image that we hope is both provocative to readers, as well as insightful to all of our stakeholders in our community about the conditions that our children are living in. We continue to use the data book as a sentinel for our youth population. We hope that you will find that young child on the cover in mind, and you'll think of him as you synthesize the data in the data book. His solitary image represents a harbinger of hope or something else. And we will really sift through that with the data as we walk through the data book. Over the course of the next hour, my teammates are going to provide highlights of some of the most compelling data points in the data book. And because we have a wide range of stakeholders on this call, from policymakers to national partners, youth service providers, corporate partners, economists, as you listen to these data points and peruse the data book, we've posed some really important questions in the welcome at the very beginning of the book that we hope will guide and govern how you synthesize the information you read. Some of the questions that have governed our work are: have we upheld our social contracts with children over the course of time? Do we fully understand what they need from us in order to thrive? How do we collectively, cohesively, and urgently respond to children in distress? And then the ultimate questions that we have for you today as are kind of really probing questions, like who are we building for? And a really stark question: what if we were headed to a society without children? I want you to sit with that for a minute. Saul will talk a little more about why that question is really important for all of us. Now, as St. Croix Foundation moves into our 4th year of stewarding this invaluable community resource, our Kids Count team is admittedly proud that to date, we continue to fulfill all of the key priorities we set when we became the territory's Kids Count grantee in 2020. First, we are collecting and reporting current data in order to accurately reflect the well-being of our children's lives during rapidly changing times, offering our community a glimpse of the true state of our children and families in real time. We are incorporating data from nonprofit organizations across the territory in order to tell a more holistic and complete story about children. And three, we are really honing in on our far too often overlooked youth population, our opportunity youth, ages 16 to 24. Finally, we encourage everyone who has the opportunity to access the data book, that as we get better with presenting the data, we really need people to use the data. We remain committed to presenting the data in a way that will offer the greatest degree of utility for our community partners. Our hope is that there is sufficient contextual framing throughout the report that can be directly lifted from the data book and pasted into funding proposals, policy recommendations. We hope that there will be a significant benefit, particularly to our low capacity nonprofits and our government data partners. In closing, before I turn over the mic to my colleagues, Dr. Ana Gabriel, our productions lead, and Dr. Saul Santiago, I really hope that you will share. We're going to provide this presentation, this meeting presentation for you all when we're done, and we hope that you will share it. We hope that you will share the data book. Anna is going to kick us off this morning by talking a little bit about systems. We spent a lot of time as a team really working around systems thinking and systems approaches. And then Dr. Santiago will follow up. He's our principal researcher, and he will dive straight into the data. I want to just, before we get there, I want to just make it crystal clear that not one single piece of data, not even the most striking and sobering data points, is an indictment of any agency or any stakeholder. The hotspots belong to all of us, and the solutions, likewise, are ours to design and to build. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Anna, the mic is yours.
Ooh, thank you so much, Deanna. Just taking a sip of my tea. As comes with the season, I have been under the weather, so if I need to take a few sips as I talk, please bear with me. Good morning to all, and thank you so much for taking your time out to join us during this very busy season. We know that there are many places that you could be, and it's such a pleasure for you to be here with us. As always, I love seeing so many familiar faces. It's just such a treat to be able to be in this space with all of you, so thank you. Kicking off the data overview, I will be doing some of that contextual framing that Deanna just referenced. As with each year, our presentation of the data is framed around 4 critical domains of child well-being as put forth by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. In addition, each year, the USVI Kids Count team includes additional components to round out our comprehensive reporting, as you see here, with a focus on opportunity youth and community bright spots. So to support our overall conceptualization of the data, I'm excited to share this very busy image that you see here on your screen, but that I will guide you through just a bit. This image and this tool served as a cornerstone of last year's data book development and continues to serve as a foundational reference for our work going forward. You see here the title, which was the title of last year's data book, From Silos to Systems, Pathways to Child Wellbeing in the USVI. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk through the impetus for this image, as well as our hope for its use. So as we on the St. Croix Foundation's USVI Kids Count team continued to analyze, work with, and discuss in great detail the various data points gathered over the past several years, we really became increasingly aware of the need for different levels of perspective in that analysis. What I mean by this is that in being so close to each individual data point, we recognized the need to take time to actually zoom out and look at each domain as a whole, and then look at each and all of the data as a whole. This is an important way to see patterns, to understand connectivity between and among those individual data points and between and among the domains. So we would have conversations where we would say, hey, isn't this data point connected to this data point? And didn't we see this last year? And now this is moving in this way. So what you see on your screen was our attempt to make sense of all of that and all of those connections. In doing so, we asked ourselves, if we took a bird's eye view of the data that we've gathered, what would we see? And to answer that question, we decided to draw on the concept of systems thinking with support from an organization called The Outside. And so often we're focused only on parts of systems, but to better see the child well-being system as a whole, we drew on those 4 domains of the Kids Count model, which I previously referenced. And then we also infused our lived experience and professional insights. This image, therefore, serves as a visual representation of the system of child and family well-being in the USVI. So taking a closer look at the components, you'll see that those 4 domains of well-being, economy, health, education, family, and community, are depicted as levels of the system, referencing the historical significance and colonial implications of the sugar mill, which serves as the center point for our image. Within each domain, there is a foundational question, prompting us to consider the broad impact of each domain on a child's life. Within each domain layer, we also explore various factors that contribute to or compromise child well-being. In this visual tool, the closed ecosystems representing each domain are contained in silos. Meanwhile, the possible connections between those 4 domains are envisioned as ladders, possibilities. In a broader context, the visual tool also includes internal forces, which you see along that left-hand side. These represent foundational elements upon which many systems are built, the values, culture, history of our community. Along the right-hand side, the impact of the external forces is depicted as winds that turn the mill, with the power source represented as blades that reflect the critical inputs that influence the system's operation. You'll also notice that there's a blank space on one of the blades in that top right-hand side. This intentionally prompts users, such as yourselves, to consider what other factors may serve as critical inputs to the system. And if we're able to take a step back and look at these systems, we can see the bigger picture. We're called to consider the degree to which there is communication, cohesion, and collaboration across the domains, the degree to which our foundational internal forces are being prioritized in our thinking and decision-making, the ways that external forces have the ability to shake the system. And along the top left, you'll see framing the comprehensive visual is a greeting used by Maasai warriors, Kasirian and Gira, asking, "And how are the children?" The intention behind this statement is to remind us that we are still a village, and to acknowledge that the well-being of our children is a direct reflection of the well-being of our society. In closing, I want to remind us all that this tool is intended to be a living document, and we invite the wisdom of our community to join us in this journey. We want each of you to really use this tool. In the physical version of last year's data book, it was designed as a centerfold that could actually be removed and written on, copied, posted, referenced, discussed, and queried. In this year's data book, it is shown on the inner back spread. We hope that it will challenge our collective thinking about the system that currently exists and the system that we seek to build for our children and their families. Ultimately, we hope stakeholders will refer to this visual tool often as a prompt for deeper interrogation of the programs and policies as we strive to nurture a culture of systems thinking with the recognition that everything is connected to everything. And now I'll turn it over to Saul to discuss the data climate and key data points from this year's data book.
Good morning, everyone. We will now place the link to the 2023 Kids Count USVI data book in the chat. There it is. So I will give everyone a minute to click and open it up. Feel free to go ahead in the chat. You can click on it. We are excited for you to explore our 2023 Kids Count book. We have curated 60 figures, tables, and charts, and hundreds of bullet points based on data collected from dozens of agencies and organizations from both the public and private sector. So feel free to go into the chat and open up the data book, and I'll be walking you through that. First, I'd like to set the table by talking about our approach to data collection and laying out a guide to the types of information you will find in our data book this year. So Kids Count books have traditionally relied on data from the Virgin Islands Community Survey and local agencies. Because we do not have a current VIX, Virgin Islands Community Survey. We work directly with private and public agencies to gather information on children in the USVI. These conversations help to guide our choices around what to include. So for every data point that you see, there were several more that were collected and even charted, but did not make the final product. And our goal here was to provide the most current data possible and to provide meaningful insight into the data. Most of the information collected was for the years 2018 through 2022, although we included earlier years if they were helpful for contextual reasons. We also included some 2023 data, specifically public school student enrollment, and select data from Department of Human Services and the VI Police Department. I encourage everyone to read the Data Systems Solutions piece on page 5. It details the general data climate in the USVI and the challenges that the environment presents to large-scale efforts such as ours. And it offers some suggestions for overall improvement. That said, we are grateful for the wealth of information that was shared with us. Within the main domains, let me highlight just a few data points and charts to get you started. I spoke earlier about our desire to provide meaningful insight and context for USVI child data, and our deep dive into the 2020 census data is an example of this. The demographic profiles from the 2020 census were released earlier this year, and we were able to include it here. Starting on page 6, we break down the USVI child data by demographics such as race and gender, but we go beyond that to discuss the impacts of the census data, including how many children live in poverty and where they are located, how many grandparents are caregivers, that number is 2,650 by the way, and the shifts that have occurred as the USVI population has grown older over the last 2 decades. Next, I want to call your attention to the age-sex pyramids on pages 8 and 9 of the data book, where we created a set of custom charts based on census data to better visualize the changes in the USVI's population, the age concentrations over time. While I know that the age brackets are going to be hard to read on the slides, what you need to know is that the top of the pyramid are the older age ranges, and the percentage of residents who are children are the bottom 4 bars. As we move from the 2000 census on the left to the 2010 census in the middle, and finally to the 2020 census on the right, you will see that the percentage of Virgin Islands residents under 18 has decreased, while the percentage of residents age 55 and over has increased. As shown in these figures, every category under age 40 had a decline in percentages between 2000 and 2020. In the USVI, approximately 21.3% of residents are over 65, higher than the national average, which is 16.8%. And as of the 2020 census, the number of children living in the USVI was half of what it was in the 2000 census. In this slide, we have a visual of child poverty in the USVI. The estates with the highest percentage of child poverty are darker red. We have these maps throughout the book, and what we do is we overlay them with the locations of schools and public housing communities, for example. There are 5,576 children living in poverty. That's 33% of all children living in the USVI. You can find that number on page 12. The island of St. Croix had the highest percentage of children living in poverty, with 36% of children living in families below the poverty line. These tables represent the estates in each island with the highest percentage of families with income below poverty levels. The estate with the highest percentage of families with income below poverty levels on St. Croix was the Estate Paradise. The estate with the highest percentage of families with income levels below poverty on St. Thomas was Estate Bavoni, and the estate with the highest percentage of families with income below poverty levels on St. John is Estate Mandal. We discuss this further on page 12 if you want to read more about that. On page 32, we examine the academic impacts of natural disasters and the pandemic on student academic performance. The Virgin Islands Department of Education administered the Smarter Balance Assessment in the spring of 2022 for school year 2021-22, and they achieved a 95% participation rate across all students in both districts, allowing for the best window yet into post-pandemic public school student academic performance. There was a sharp decline in student scores across the board, with English language arts proficiency dropping by 7.3 percentage points and math proficiency decreasing 3.9 percentage points from pre-pandemic levels. Overall, the results represent the largest decline in student academic performance since the Virgin Islands Department of Education adopted the more rigorous Smarter Balanced Assessment System, which is based on national standards. Of course, there is a larger context here as well. Nationally, post-pandemic students' performance and standardized testing suffered, with the results so dire that U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona called the results appalling and unacceptable. Both math and ELA scores were down nationally post-COVID. Our public sector agencies provide many essential services for youth and families. However, many nonprofit organizations are also offering and expanding supports that meet children's needs. The enrollment at the Caribbean Center for Boys and Girls of the Virgin Islands has been trending upward and has more than doubled over the last 3 years. And since the COVID pandemic, the Resource Center and Women's Coalition of St. Croix have both identified an increase in the number of males seeking support, and both noted increases in services related to domestic violence and mental health issues during the COVID isolation. And as we can see in this chart, the Family Resource Center in St. Thomas served 379 minors in 2022, a large increase compared to the 222 they served in 2021. And we noticed that across the board with increases in services requested and sought. And finally, I want to call your attention to the ways in which we work hand in hand with our data partners to improve the understanding of the information we report. We view the data book as a collaboration, an opportunity to collect not just the traditional kids count indicators, but new data points that are uniquely relevant to the U.S. Virgin Islands. To that end, we encourage agencies to reach out and provide input, and we also request follow-up meetings to discuss how we can provide additional context to help our readers. One example in this year's data book is the Department of Health's WIC program. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Service, the USVI reported the highest breastfeeding percentage rate, including fully and partially breastfed infants, of all the WIC state agencies. We met with the WIC team and they provided important background information, which you can find on page 41, regarding their efforts in order to achieve this outcome. Another example was the Department of Education's English Language Learner Program. We have reported for 3 years now that the number of English Language Learner students on St. Thomas is much higher than the St. Croix number. For example, 903 on St. Thomas last school year compared to 237 on St. Croix. This year, we met with the VIDE's ELL State Director on this subject, and on page 27, you will find additional context on ELL enrollment, English Language Learner enrollment, that discusses some of the factors that contribute to this differential, as well as steps that the department is taking to invest further in the program. The final example I'll give is from the Virgin Islands Police Department's Office of Highway Safety, who reached out to us recently with a 2022 survey data that they felt was important, and which we included on page 38. The first time we have included child passenger safety in a kids count data book. 58.6% of child passengers in the USVI under the age of 13 rode either unrestrained or without the appropriate child restraints. We are thankful to these agencies and their leadership for their time and for making critical staff available to us for follow-up inquiries, which provide data points and insights unique to the USVI Kids Count data book. I hope that this year's data book proves valuable to you as you draft policy, as you advocate, as you conduct research, and as you write grants and equitably allocate resources for the betterment of the Virgin Islands and its children. Activate the data in this book. Now, I'll pass it along to my colleague, Lori Blake, who will go into more detail on how our team created the detailed maps on population and child poverty.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Noe Blake, and I am the data researcher for the Kid Counts team. This year, we created another set of maps from the 2020 decennial census that you will see in the data book. As you can see on the slide, we have visualized the density of the children population in the Virgin Islands by state for all 3 islands and pinpointed the location of the public school. With the enrichment of the maps with additional layers showcasing the geographic location of the public school within the territory, we aim to provide a clearer understanding of the demographic distribution in relation to the public school in these maps. You can see that this layered approach allows us for a more comprehensive analysis by juxtaposing the concentration of the children with the proximity of educational facilities. Policymakers, urban planners, and educators can then leverage integrated map to identify areas with high child population density and assess the accessibility of the public school in those areas. Then this information can be used for making informed decisions related to education, infrastructure development, resource allocation, and community planning, ultimately contributing to the enhancement of educational opportunities and the overall well-being of the VI population. What sets this approach apart for us is the potential to enhance the census-based map by incorporating additional layers of information from additional data source by cross-referencing different data points, such as income level, median family income, educational attainment, employment statistic. For example, we can create a richer, multidimensional visualization that can provide a better understanding of the social and economic landscape of the VI. So we hope to develop more similar visuals in the future and make them available to the public. And now I want to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Sherman Hobson.
Good morning, everyone, and season's greetings. As we continue to look earnestly and eagerly to the future with hope and promise, I am reflecting on our journey that we chose, or the path that we chose to get here. The Croix Foundation wanted to capture all of our young children in our data book, but we felt we should address the plight of our adolescents and young adults because they were the population that were more challenged. Depression, mental health, social issues, different plights were prevailing in their lives. So we didn't necessarily want to be different. We needed to be different. So like Saul and the others have mentioned, we met with our nonprofit agencies and our government agencies to focus on this population. This population we call the Opportunity Youth. I remember several years ago, we having a discussion about it with the Croix Foundation. We learned about it through the EKC Foundation. And we thought, what a perfect term to describe the opportunities that are being deprived from our children because they are disconnected from programs, individuals, and experiences that they need to thrive. This population, like I said, they're between the ages of 16 to 24. According to the 2020 census, there are 8,093 youth between the ages of 16 to 24. St. John has 267, St. Thomas 3,962, and St. Croix 3,864. Now, we're not saying that all of them are opportunity youth. There are adolescents and young adults, but there's a sector within them that need our consistent and collaborative support. These are our opportunity youth. The USVI data that we are sharing with you and the national trends that basically let you know how closely we are linked to the national level with regards to some of our data points. We were able to get this information with much ease from these agencies. And like I said, I'm sharing with you the information on the Opportunity Youth, where Saul gave you a broad brush of what our entire data book entails. I am pinpointing specifically this population. Our data book has 4 primary domains, and they're linked closely to the Annie KFC Foundation's domains as well. Economic well-being, family and community, education and health. And our data book attempted to include something about the Opportunity Youth throughout the entire book. For example, on economic well-being on page 12, 33% of our USVI children are living in poverty, with St. Croix having the highest number of child poverty. In the family and community section on page 16, in 2022, VI Housing Authority reported 46% of housing residents 25 years and younger were residing at their homes, which is a decrease from 51% in 2021. In education, on page 31, the graduation rate for Black students in 2021-2022 was 73.3%. 81% is the national public high school graduation rate in 2019-2020. That's what the data said at that time. With our Hispanics, the graduation rate was 66%, but this is an increase from 59.1% in 2020-2021 school year and 46.8% in 2019-2020. Unfortunately, the national graduation rate for the Hispanic students in 2019-2020 was 83%. But the good news is our Hispanic students are climbing in the right direction. In the area of health on page 41, I decided to capture what the nonprofit health agencies are doing. The federally qualified health centers, the FQHCs, St. Thomas and St. Croix, they're doing phenomenal work to address mental health. And in the 2022 year, they screened, the Frederick Said Health Center on St. Croix screened 4,873 individuals 12 and older for depression. The St. Thomas East End Medical Center Corporation screened 3,085. So those are 4 domains, but we also have the child and family demographics. And on page 6, the number of children, according to the 2020 census in the USVI, under the age of 18 is 17,086. Imagine in the year 2000, 20 years ago, it was 34,289. Remember the slides that Dr. Santiago showed us where the aging population is now the majority in the Virgin Islands. And then we have 2 other sections, Spotlight on Opportunity Youth and Community Bright Spots. I will talk about those briefly in the next couple of slides. So there's a section primarily for the Opportunity Youth. It's called Spotlight on Opportunity Youth. And we honed in on all the information we could possibly get on this phenomenal population who are in need of our support. The high school dropout rate on page 44 remain consistent except for 2020-2021. And if you recall, that was we were in the midst of COVID. On page 46, VIPD provide us with the youth violent crimes, and that data jumped from 198 in 2021 to 243 in 2022. We also have support services and opportunities within our data book regarding our Opportunity Youth. The Department of Labor continues to show an increase in their employment offerings for individuals between the ages of 16 to 24. In fact, their summer youth work experience program continues to be one of their largest programs, where they served 690 individuals in 2022. and their Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Youth Program, which focus primarily on the opportunity youth, continue to grow as well. I looked at the community bright spots, and Alicia will go into that a little more in detail, but there was also data in that section from our nonprofits. And for example, we captured the departments of sports, park, and recreation in this area because they continue to do a phenomenal job with engaging our students in sports and recreational activities. And if you look at the slide, it is a beautiful pie chart showing the elementary and high school children that they're serving throughout the year, that year. And then CCBGVI, Caribbean Center for Boys and Girls of the Virgin Islands, on page 51, they enrolled 258 youth in 2023. Their enrollment by grade level is provided, and I'll talk to you a little bit about them as I go on in the next slide. So that's all I'm going to share with you. I hope I've piqued your interest, that you want to really take a deeper dive into the data book about where our young children are, how they're doing, and that opportunity youth, that population that are truly in need of our continued guidance. But where are our children? We know we have them. Our rich data definitely says that they are out there. But we need to change the narrative where our opportunity youth are concerned. We have our government and nonprofit agencies who continue to provide extraordinary programs and services for our children. But a concern that is constantly placed before us people is that our children need access to these amazing opportunities. I'll give you an example. I briefly talked about CCBGVI. Their numbers doubled over the year, and that is because they provide transportation for their children to get from the school to their facility. When talking to our nonprofits, when talking to our young children, they want to go to these programs. When talking to government agencies, our children really want to get to these programs, but transportation becomes a barrier and provides them a challenge when they need to go out and be a part of these initiatives. And another concern that has been brought before us is the need to collaborate across the board with other agencies to better serve our opportunity youth. We cannot continue to work siloed systems. We're doing a great job, amazingly well, when we are working within our own capacities, our own programs. But as we've said, and Dr. Scarborough stated, we need those ladders to open the doors, to climb high, and to engage with other agencies and promote and excel and provide the changes that our opportunity youth need. So I'm going to leave you with a little quote that kind of encapsulates everything I was trying to say about systems thinking as we move forward. And this is by Russell Ackoff. He's a pioneer in the field of systems thinking and management science. And he said, a system is never the sum of its parts. It is the product of their interactions. So as we continue to move forward to provide support to our opportunity youth, please let us continue to collaborate more richly, have more engaging and meaningful interactions, and let's provide the best services for our opportunity youth. Alicia will take us on our journey thus far with the Croix Foundation and the Kids Count Data Book. Thank you.
I'm just going to quickly run through community bright spots. Several of my colleagues, Saul and Charmaine, have talked about community bright spots and and how we got to this. So I'll just say quickly that when we became the stewards of Kids Count, we really grounded our work in the premise that data is information. Okay, and we often say that, and it can be gathered in multiple ways. We tend to sort of lean on quantitative data, but because of St. Croix Foundation's history in community development, we also understand that the qualitative data is just as important and significant, and it tells a story as well. And so we, of course, continue to collect the government agencies, but we started interviewing our nonprofits. And this is one case where the pandemic actually gave us an opportunity to interface with nonprofits, not just on the island of St. Croix, but across the territory on St. Thomas and St. John. And today interviewed one-to-one interviews with the heads of our nonprofit organizations on the 3 islands, 36 of them. And we plan to continue that work because they are giving us a perspective. If we think of the hurricanes, in many cases, they were the safety net when government agencies couldn't be quite as nimble because of size. The nonprofits were there and were always there and have a deep history with community residents and, of course, our children and families. So we have grounded our work in that, and will continue to look at both the quantitative side of things, but also gather the qualitative stories inside of that as well. The other thing that I want to just speak to is that Charmaine just talked about the fact of nonprofits providing the kinds of supports that they have, and they always have. But one of the things that we found, in addition to having these opportunities available in many nonprofit organizations that we have interviewed, but the access to those opportunities for young people are sometimes limited because of things like transportation. So I'm going to give the opportunity here where the partnering that my other colleague, Ana Scabriel, talked about is the fact that when we can cross those ladders and that sugar mill, and we can connect across those seemingly disparate structure, then we can create opportunities even for the nonprofits. I'll give you a quick example. Transportation. We interviewed a nonprofit who talked the program is absolutely wonderful, but they can't get the young people there because they're starting up. They can't afford a van or a bus or some kind of transportation. Then we've talked to a government agency who talked about having transportation and things like that that are put out of service and out of use. So if we can cross those silos, not just the silos between those areas that we talked about, but our silos between what nonprofits and government agencies, the ways in which they communicate, ways in which they connect, perhaps we can create more opportunities for them to serve, and then we can also create more opportunities for our youth. So I'm going to just shift there and talk about a little bit more about the nonprofits as we, talk about where young people are. And I'd like to, before I start asking Lily to share the covers, I'd just like to say this, that during Irma and Maria, it was, as I said, often nonprofits who were nimble enough to be able to be frontline support for our children and families. And that's where they often turn to. Why we choose the covers that we do, because it's in the context of understanding that this book is representative of, once again, not just numbers, right? But it is also representative of what we want to see, either our current state in the territory or our aspirational vision for our youth in the territory. So we started out in 2020 with a snapshot, which was a very smaller version of a data book. And we just really kind of laid out how we would try to build level pathways for our children and what some of the things were needed. Dr. Santiago talked, let's talk about data and what role that plays and what we can do about that. And he continued to talk about that in this data book. I think it's almost right after the welcome. But the first one that we did, which was this snapshot, we entitled it Our Ujima Journey, and using the beautiful artwork of Marcus Anderson, and that's the title of his piece, Ujima Journey. We started out using the images that we present in context of what we want to convey, express, and what we feel and think, and want to collectively have the community embrace around our children and families and their well-being and how they are faring. So pointed out a couple of years ago, 3 years now, you see, and I'm not going to go into it in detail, but you can just look at this image and you can see what is happening there. The elders are scaffolding the children and they're not even looking at them at all because they know their job, their responsibility. And the children are focused on going higher. Look, even the babies climbing up. And they're not worried about whether they're going to be dropped. So everyone is working to the benefit of having the children getting higher. Kasirian and Gera was the words that I used then. It's the Maasai warrior greeting that men in Kenya do. Kasirian and Gera, how are the children? Because they believe if the children are well, then the village is well. Our first full Kids Count data book in 2021, we chose to convey our aspirational vision for what well-being would look like. And we are graced here with the work of our local renowned artist, Elisa McKay. And this piece that she allowed us to use is called Child's Play. That's what we hope our children's lives will be, child's play. This one, which was last year, and the title of the book was From Silos to Systems. And in this one, we were graced with the work of Nyaris Walker, and the title of her piece is Riveted. And if you remember, I asked you to sit with this for a minute because it can convey a lot of different things to people. Maybe she's just looking down at a phone. Maybe she's looking down because she's spending a lot of time looking down. She's depressed. But the reality was to call to us to say, let's look deeper. And in the data book, you will see the results of the last YRBS study, Youth Risk Behavior Study. That was done in 2017. And some startling responses from our young people to that survey that says that they are troubled, and many of them are troubled in some ways. And how do we respond to that? What is our response to that? I'll just say this, Lily, if you can just hold that slide for a bit. Our young people are coming through difficult times with 2 hurricanes and a global pandemic. They're still standing and they're sounding the clarion call. They're standing up for justice. They marched at Charlotte Amalie High School. They marched at Central High School. They're blowing the conch. They're calling us to action and paying homage to the ancestors through remembrance. They're blowing the conch. But do we hear them? Do we hear them? do we see them? Or will we allow the sun to set on them without the promise of a brighter tomorrow?
Thank you, Alicia. Just sitting there for a second, as many times as I have seen, our journey and the covers, it's still, it's a compelling time. And, Deanna James, our president, she talks about this being one of the more consequential data books. And we all as a team agree. Alicia, I want to say thank you for ensuring that we look back at the journey that we've been on. It is a continuum of work. When we publish a data book, it isn't, we've published it and it's done. So thank you very much to everyone for your pieces in this presentation today. That does sort of officially bring us to a close for this release presentation. Although in all reality, I think that we've opened up many, many doors and spaces where we can collaborate and work together. I do want to just say a very sincere thank you to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who continues to support our work and the U.S. Virgin Islands around child well-being. I also, just as every single member of our team has said here today, as all of our government data partners, our nonprofit partners, know, we really are about convening and rallying our community around critical issues that affect us all. To that end, I just want to sort of lift up a comment that was in the chat from Jennifer Nugent-Hill, talking about the corporate citizens in our community and convening them around these issues as well. I want you to know, to everyone in the call, moving forward, we are doing that, and we will be doing more of it. And I really want to take a special moment as a show, a demonstration, testimony that the civic sector, the public sector, and the private sector, we are pulling them together into a cohesive, collective body in support of Kids Count. And I would like to just say thank you to the government of the U.S. Virgin Islands, who has helped to fund this work, along with corporate citizens, Tropical Shipping, Seven Seas Water Group, Diane Management, Team Consultants, GAM Software, and Austin Services. These are corporate citizens who recognize the worth and value of current real-time data in terms of bringing in resources and addressing needs. I'm not going to belabor the information on your screen too much. You could take a screenshot. I think that Haley has been putting the ways to access the data book in the chat. You can always contact Deanna and I directly. But for now, I would like to open up the floor for any questions that we can, or comments that you'd like to put on the table. And when we're done with Q&A, we'll close out with a few words from Deanna.
Awesome. Okay, well, there's a question from Ms. Genevieve Whitaker. Great work by the team members. My question centers on the support services in the educational area. How are those services being measured by the respective providers? What are some of the outcomes as it pertains to the effectiveness of those programs and areas of opportunities for additional services to complement as well to address gaps? So those are the services in the educational arena.
So I'll jump in really quick. So at the Kids Count, obviously, we don't know how VID specifically measures the services they receive from providers. What we then do, Ms. Whitaker, is we obviously capture the outcomes, right? So we do in our education section is the biggest part. by far of our data book. And so we collect we looked this year, especially deeply at the academic outcomes. We looked at the impacts of dropouts and graduation rates. So these could be echoes of, the work that's happening within VIDE and with their providers, but obviously, I would refer to them as to, the work that they're doing with their specific providers. We just measure, as you said, the outcomes of those as it relates to the measurables that we can gather from them.
And then we have a question from Ms. Saida Carter. Can there or will there be an additional workshop for educators, especially school leaders, to discuss how we can really work to improve this data? So that this speaks to the activating the data piece, specifically engaging educators and educational leaders.
I'll try and take a stab at that. So as Lily mentioned just now, we are planning a fairly full 2024 convening schedule. We have a Kids Count Summit on the calendar, and we are really committed to working with independent stakeholders, but we're also really committed to cultivating a culture of collaboration. And so while we recognize the value of working and connecting individually with our key stakeholders, Department of Education, educational service providers, we also recognize that oftentimes when too much of that individual convening happens, that opportunities, we don't access opportunities to cultivate real collaboration between what may seem like disparate stakeholders and partnerships with our nonprofit, even private sector partners. And so our hope is to begin convening in a way that really nurtures that. And we're looking forward to getting all the feedback that we need from our data partners, but then also finding ways to facilitate cross-sector partnerships and initiatives.
Thank you, Deanna. The next question comes from Ms. Susan Crane. Thanks for this amazing work. Would you comment on the siloing problem for nonprofits, such as My Brother's Workshop as an example? Are there elements beyond transportation difficulty that could be addressed, speaking to the silos?
I'll try that. Alita, you can chime in, and Charmaine. Because so much of the foundation's work, even outside of Kids Count, is in partnership with nonprofits, we have, I think, a fairly keen understanding of the challenges that nonprofits face. Overarching problem for most nonprofits, obviously, is resources. And then the other really significant piece I just talked about is just really working in meaningful collaboration with a public sector. And I think that is one of the silos that we have to sort of get our arms around, is how to figure out how to direct nonprofits who need resources and government agencies that need service providers to come together in a way that allows them to leverage their assets. And so that is, I think, a huge part of what we're looking to the future to facilitate. And we're but there's so many challenges. Transportation just happens to be a huge part of the challenge that nonprofits have to overcome. But then there are other pieces, and we talk about a world without children. Like, that is a huge part of the challenge in front of us here in the Virgin Islands, where we have a youth population that is decreasing quite significantly, and a population that is aging quite rapidly. And then you have, in places like Frederick said, you have this wealth of, rich pool of nonprofits, service providers. And the challenge that we hear now is that they have all these services and no children, because almost all the schools that are, due west of the island of St. Croix have been shuttered. And so there are those kinds of disconnects that I think are really contributing to the challenges that nonprofits are facing.
Oh, I was going to just say one other thing with regard to that, and that is the value of looking at multiple ways to present data. When starting with data is information, that can be presented in multiple ways. That's where you have this beautiful mapping that shows you, here's the schools, here's public housing, here's this, here's that. And when you're able to look at it visually, I'm a visual learner. When I look at it visually, aha, I see a disconnect with that. And what can we do in terms of our planning and implementation in real time? Not for the next proposal or whatever, right now. That happened to us. We were in a conversation with the government agency, and we were telling them about the struggle for transportation with some of our nonprofits who may not have the licensing or the resources or the vans or whatever. And they said, we've got things, we have some things that been put out of use because the program may be ended or something happened in that way. So it's once again trying to connect and in real time, but that has to be intentional, that people are willing to sit down and talk about their needs and then talk about what they each can contribute in a collective way to solutions.
And I wanted to add to that by saying that a lot of the times, our government agencies are phenomenal, our nonprofits, they are too. But if they can all sit at the table together and come up with strategies, I'm stuck on opportunity use. But if they would all sit at the table together and come up with great solutions to improve the lives of this population, we really would see a change. I think a lot of the times they are siloed because of just the way things are. But I went to a conference several years ago, and I sat next to this gentleman, and I cannot remember what state, and it's bothering me right now. But he said he was worked with a government agency, and he said every year the nonprofits and other agencies that are tied into programs that they want to disseminate to the public, they meet collaboratively and see how they can share their money and figure out what to do with the funds that they're having to make sure that they're not duplicating things, but they're providing programs where everybody can be able to have access to it. So I think, like Deanna said and Alethea alluded to as well, if we could collaborate and connect more, we get the changes that we desire.
Wonderful discussion. We have a few more questions in the chat before, Emanuela, I see your hand raised. Ms. Phillips Dorset, I had seen that your hand was raised and we didn't get to you in time, but I see you dropped in the chat, so we're going to get right there. So there was a question from Ms. Burke. With Seaview Adolescent Unit closing and rumors of YRC closing, are there any plans for programs that will render intervention programs that address children involved in criminal activities? And I mean, that sounds specific to St. Thomas and the St. John District, which we may or may not be able to speak to, but would be happy to circle back to if we need to note that. Deanna?
Yeah, no, it's like I'm going to say to, I think most questions here today, they are great questions. And it's the reason that we are committed to facilitating some really targeted convenings, is to put all of those questions in front of the folks who I think have the answers to the question. I think all of us have a piece of the answer. And so our hope is that you hold that question, and that as we get into the new year and we start reconnecting with our partners and convening around this, around the data, that those the answers to those questions will sort of like bubble up to the surface. So I just ask all the folks who have very specific questions like that to hold those questions for when we reconvene next year.
If I could say, Deanna, and I would tie that to what Ms. Phillips Dorset also said, later on in the chat regarding, like the YRC data. I spoke about the increased need and the increased demand from the nonprofit sector as well. And she cites, data from page 47, 37% were repeat offenders. And, what's interesting about that is if you there's a lot to drill down there. If you go even further, we have stats right before that as well, Ms. Phillips Dorset, that talks about even the youth that are not incarcerated, and some of the challenges they face. 40% of them, the number of them that had siblings, for example, who were also, had run-ins with the juvenile justice system. And that speaks to what you were saying, the support services that are needed, because a lot of these aren't, there's not one single cause necessarily, but we have a lot of data in addition to the one that you posted that talks about what are the factors, where they live, what type of offense they committed, their substance abuse, if that's the case. And so, yes, that absolutely focusing on the type of support services and how we can all participate in being part of the supports is going to be important to solve a problem like this, rather than, one agency necessarily or one entity.
Thank you, Dr. Santiago. There are several additional comments just applauding, and commenting on the importance of collaboration. We're going to keep going. I just want to take a point of personal privilege to say that in my experience, nonprofits and, are very, very collaboratively oriented when their needs are met. And so it's really, collaboration is often an unfunded work. And it takes work for nonprofits to collaborate and to sit at the table and figure stuff out beyond the silos of their individual programs. And so when we only fund nonprofits to do very, very specific programmatic work and not their general operating, it creates an environment that creates silos. And so I just say that to the community at large to say collaboration is work and work to be funded. I will go ahead so there were a number of comments about collaboration, and then Emanuela has her hand up and a comment in the chat, so we can hand it over. You can unmute yourself, Emanuela, and ask if you'd like.
Still morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for doing this. I hear the conch shell blowing, and I stand, of course, in unity with everyone on this call that our youth need our support and our specific direction. My question is though around our parenting. Have we been able to dive deep into how much support maybe that we're not putting in to assisting child rearing in the Virgin Islands, and in regards specifically to like young mothers? I remember there was a time where specifically we used to put things aside to make sure that young mothers have the resources they need to be educated and understand what supports are out there. Did we get a chance to dive deep into the level of supports we put into actual parenting and rearing of children in the Virgin Islands?
I'm going to say once again, great question, Emanuela. No, I mean, one of the data points that's actually a bright spot, it's interesting, is that our teen pregnancy rate has continued to go down. And so we don't have the large population of teen mothers that we had, 10, 20 years ago. And so that is one bright spot. But I think concurrent with that, we as a collective have not really prioritized supporting families with child rearing. And, the cost of living here in the Virgin Islands is, I think, a huge part of the stressors on families. And so, like we say, we have to think about this holistically. I know for many years when we were doing work in education, there was always this tension between, it's the parents' fault or it's the school's fault. And, I think as we have evolved as an organization and have a deeper understanding of all the pieces of the system that have a role to play in, the healthy, outcomes for children, everyone is responsible. All of us are responsible. And I think that, as we think about next year and coming together and trying to be really, really intentional and thoughtful about how we convene, not just who we convene, but how we convene people around a different way of solving problems. And so I thank you for that question, but there are a lot of pieces to that we all have to answer to get to, the
I think
core.
I'm specifically talking to like financially, did we look at the budget and see how much our local government puts in place for that? Like budget-wise, do we budget $2 million toward families? Do we budget $50 million toward families here in the Virgin Islands? Because I can see where we budget toward gas. How do we budget for families in our budget?
Emanuela, can I just add one quick thing to that? That's great question, because the other thing, when Saul showed that how our population is declining in terms of youth and burgeoning when it comes to seniors, many of caregivers are elders. They're senior caregivers as well. And how are we specifically focusing on those seniors who are also caregivers to children, their grandchildren? What are we doing to accommodate their needs when we talk about giving people strategies and providing opportunities to come into their caregiving? Because it's a whole different world. I'm a grandparent now, whole different world than when I parent my child versus my grandchildren now. So I think that's another piece that, as we look at that population shift, what does that mean for seniors who are caregivers?
Thank you. Thank you for that. So these are so wonderful, and we could talk about each individual question for an hour, but in the interest of time and everybody here, I want to just make sure that we get to, there are several more outstanding questions here. One of them is Miss Diane Morales. I see your hand up. Open the mic to you. And then we have a few more in the chat before we close.
I am Diane Morales from St. Thomas East End. I just wanted to say I really appreciate this presentation today. It just solidifies what we see here in the clinic and all the issues with the youth and among our community. However, one of my biggest things is collaboration takes time. It takes investment. It takes passion. It takes money. But one of the things that we do is we get together a lot of times and we collaborate, but we never really put the amount of action that needs to be in these collaborations in order for these things to be effective. And for 2024, that is one of the things that I would really like to see us take, not just collaborating and talking, because in talking, a lot of times you find out that in the Virgin Islands, because we're so limited with resources, even though we're this small and we're demographically located where we are, sometimes in just conversations, you can find that we have resources in different entities that can complement each other, where we can fill these gaps in a lot of the issues. It's just that we don't really spend time putting these collaborations into action. We get caught up in the day-to-day and just doing what we're doing in our private entities instead of working across the board to enforce these things. And sometimes in just conversation, you'd be surprised how many resources we actually do have at hand. It's just that it's just so spread out among different entities. We can't see it.
I just want to say, Diane, I just want to say thank you so much.
Yeah, and so for 2024, that's what I would like to see. I would like for us to put more passion into the action of doing these things so that we can fill these gaps, because the gaps are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the community is really suffering.
I just want to say thank you so much, Diana. We're going to really try and give people back some time today, but I just want to say this. You kind of like, I think this is like such a perfect way to kind of close out this conversation, because you're talking to an organization that has dedicated a lot of time and energy and resources to building competency around collaboration. And in 2016, when we launched our nonprofit consortium, it was with the singular objective of connecting organizations that worked really well together. We talked to each other regularly. We worked together. We had great rapport, but collaborating is deeper. And I remember when I talked to one of my founders, board founders, around this idea that we had around bringing nonprofits together in a much more intimate and intentional way. And she said to me, be very careful, Deanna. People think that collaboration is a muscle that we're born with, and it's not. And as a result of that guidance, we dedicated a lot of time and resources to actually training around collaboration before we actually started working on collaborating. And so as I was talking to you around like what we're thinking about for next year, And I said, almost more important than the outcome is the how we collaborate, the how, not just who and what we collaborate around. We are dedicating an incredible amount of thought and intention around how we build competency in our stakeholder community around collaborations before we define like what we're going to work together to do. And so, Diane, your commentary is absolutely spot on. We continue to sit with around 25 to 30 nonprofits. For the last 7 years, we have built, it takes time. We are still working on building the kinds of trust and relationships that allow collaboration to happen. But we are absolutely convicted in how important it is to build those muscles, because when they're built, the kinds of outcomes that we get to see now that are being made manifest because of the investments that we've made around collaboration are really some of the greatest work that we've done at the foundation has happened because of our commitment to building this competency in our sector in St. Croix. And we want to see how that we can share that with the folks in St. Thomas and St. John, with folks outside of our nonprofit sector and our public sector and our private sector. And so we are really, really putting a lot of time and energy into planning our convenings for next year.
From there, Deanna, there are several more comments are all outstanding, but why don't you take it from here, Deanna, in terms of wrapping us up? And I just want to draw your attention. I think that Dr. Chen's last comment is a great last comment. If you want to reference that as you begin to wrap us up.
Ubuntu, yes. She's Dr. Chen is one of our. She's not only on the advisory committee for our nonprofit consortium, but she's just a really important partner and part of our nonprofit family at the foundation, and we are really grateful for the work that she has done to help us grow this idea that we had that has really transformed the way that we work and the outcomes of our investment. So I'm gonna I want everybody to stay engaged. There is email addresses. Please don't let this be the end. The foundation is very accessible. We will not be accessible actually after this week, because for the first time we are actually closing our doors for 2 weeks to give our team an opportunity. I think most of my Kids Count team needs to just take a nap because they have been up. I think we did an all-nighter last night to get ready for today. And so our offices will be closed actually for 2 weeks till early next year. And then we're going to, pedal to the metal, get moving on activating all of this data that we've shared with you in the data book. In the meantime, we'll have hard copies early next year. We have the virtual digital copies available to anyone who wants to have a copy of it. Please just email any member of our team. Jacqueline Lawrence is our point person. And so if you have any additional questions, my email address, I think most people have that, Lily, please feel free to reach out to any member of our team. But just as we kind of wrap up this morning, there's no question we've got a lot of work to do in the Virgin Islands, and the urgency around ensuring that our children are healthy and whole is, I think we can't overstate that. We really have to, I keep saying this every year, but we've got to get this right. We do a lot of kicking cans down the road, but this is one of those times where we've got to course correct on this and what's happening with our young people. Oftentimes we live on an island, but we live on an island a lot of times figuratively because of how myopic we are and in our thinking and our planning. But the reality is we're not unique. We are part of a federal system that is replete with systemic and institutional inequities. And as the only predominantly Black protectorate, those inequities are magnified in ways that many of us, I think, have grown to normalize. For this reason and for so many more, to be perfectly transparent, and I want to say this before we close out today, as the head of the foundation, I was actually initially really reluctant to take on the Herculean task of stewarding Kids Count. And my team will tell you that we had a lot of conversations. There was a lot of like, Deanna, we can do this, assuring me that this was a good decision for us. And because I knew that it was a huge responsibility. And I knew that the way that the foundation, after 33 years of service, does things, we could not and would not have step on this. This is an incredibly time-consuming, expensive endeavor for the foundation. And 4 years ago, when we said yes to Annie Casey, I promised my team and I promised Annie Casey that we would not kick the can down the road, that we were going to, yes, compile data and yes, publish data books, but we were concurrently going to place equal effort around moving the proverbial needle on child well-being. So the challenge now becomes all of ours, what we do with this data. In my opening, I queried, what if we were heading toward a future without children? And that question is not hyperbole. Our community is aging, and we're aging with fewer and fewer children being born. If there is no other data point that people walk away with, I implore you to hold on to that one. I want to also publicly respond to Jennifer Nugent-Hill. She has been, Tropical Shipping has been an incredible partner of the foundations for many, many years. And you were spot on in your question around your commentary around, small group meetings. And we are committed to doing that for 2024, as we've discussed. At the end of the day, either we turn our heads the other way because it's Christmas season and a lot of people got other things to do, or we grow like really accustomed and comfortable with the conditions that we exist in here in the Virgin Islands, and particularly the conditions that our children exist in. We really have to commit ourselves collectively to rolling up our sleeves, to getting to work. And we feel deeply, deeply, I can tell you this, that as much as this data is stark, that our team is incredibly optimistic. We really are. We get to see all pieces of this. And when we talk to government agencies, if people only knew how hard some of our government agencies are working, like really working under challenging conditions, and how hard our nonprofits are working, and how do you just harness all of that, that energy for a very specific and targeted objective. And I think we hope we can do that next year. We want to also publicly thank Santa Joseph Smith in the governor's office. She is the MVP champion of Kids Count. We could not have gotten where we are after 4 years of knocking on doors, banging on doors. Every year we say we want to get this data book out early, and every year we got to push it back because we're still waiting for data from some of our partners. And so Santa has been an incredible champion for us to get the data book completed and to build a lot of the partnerships that are necessary for Kids Count work to be successful. And so with that, I don't have anything else to say except season's greetings, and thank you so much for carving out time today to talk about a really important issue.